Thank you, Emily. And thank you everybody here for joining us today. I realize that it is a Friday evening, at least here on the East Coast, and many of you have likely had a long week after probably a long week. So your time here with us is certainly appreciated, and I hope that we can provide you with some information and guidance here that can be really of good value to you as you navigate your training and education during this somewhat chaotic time, to say the least. As Emily said, I'm Scott Sperling. I'm the chair of the Education Advisory Committee for Division 40, also the vice chair of the Committee on Early Career Psychologists and APA, and the associate training director and assistant professor of neurology at the University of Virginia. Really excited that we're able to kind of bring forward this session. We've had two other sessions prior to this, one for current interns and one for postdocs, that has been fairly well received so far. I think we've been able to get a lot of really important and big picture questions answered out there, and expect that we can do the same. Before we dive into some of the questions that were submitted ahead of time, I'd like the rest of our panelists to introduce themselves as well, and then we can get rolling. So Darren?
Sure, I'm Dr. Darren Kobia. I am a professor of psychology and neuroscience at Brigham Young University, a clinical neuropsychologist, and been a member of the SCN's EAC for about 6 years.
Hi everybody, what's up? I'm David Kaufman. I'm an associate professor of psychology at St. Louis University, and I'm a neuropsychologist who's been part of SCN for a number of years as well. I currently sit on the Educational Advisory Committee with these fine folks, and then I'm also the chair of the Publications and Communications Committee at SCN. So welcome.
Okay, thank you guys for being here today. It's greatly appreciated. Emily, you want to? I always feel like you don't even need to introduce yourself. Everybody.
I feel like everyone probably knows who I am. I'm the annoying person that sends you a million emails all the time. Hopefully some of those emails are helpful, and I think those emails maybe led most of you guys to be here today, so thank you for being here. I'm Emily Duggan. I am the chair of ANST and of SCN, and I am a postdoctoral fellow at Johns Hopkins in the Department of Psychiatry. So back over to Scott.
Thank you, Emily. Your work is greatly appreciated, and your efforts on this project and in all others on behalf of ANST members and really just the neuropsychology training community at large. All right, so if we're going to dive in here, I'm just going to kind of go through a series of questions, and the hope is that we'll get to all, or at least most of the questions that were submitted ahead of time. There's a lot of consistency in at least the themes that were presented. So I think most of you are, at least across the national landscape here, you might be in different areas, but I think you're all kind of thinking the same thing. So one of the first questions that we have is really just about sort of the timeline for internships and for postdocs, and folks really wondering if there's going to be changes in terms of when these internships or postdocs will start, either in this coming year or the years thereafter. David, I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Okay, I'm muted now. So I think with regard to the timing, I've been trying to stay attuned to all of this like everybody else has, and I'm not aware of timing really being adjusted at this point. And that's partly because this is affecting so many people and so many industries in unprecedented ways. There are also still a lot of other needs that continue to, for example, on internships, postdoc, rotations. I think there's still a lot of ways, a need to maintain as much normalcy to our schedule as possible, so that especially as we progress through training and we're at the internship or postdoc level, we're still continuing to plug in and provide the services that are needed when they're needed. Now, I think everyone is trying to be flexible, so I think it's appropriate if there is some flexibility being applied, but I'm not aware of massive, consistent schedule changes that we should all be counting on.
Thank you. And that's my understanding as well. And I think that's going to be one of the main themes that we're going to be really impressing upon you all today, is that for many reasons, there's not going to be, as much as we might like it to happen, but there's not going to be a sort of a one-size-fits-all approach to students, whether it's with respect to their particular graduate program or internships, postdocs, or even licensure and jobs. This is for a lot of different reasons, but really at the core of this is that the institutions themselves, whether they are intern training programs or they are state licensing boards, they have within themselves the sort of the authority and the rights to make decisions with respect to their individual programs and jurisdictions. So there is no sort of uniform, statement or guideline in terms of delaying, either delaying the current internship year or sort of altering when future internship years will start. I will say that another major theme that you'll hear about is if you already have your internship, you really should be in communication, if you have not already, with that internship training director, because most of the questions that are asked, most of the answers to the questions that you have are really going to be site specific. It's really going to behoove you to reach out to that particular training site and that training director to find out what they are considering, if anything, with respect to changes in their timeline. Another question we had here about sites in general is really whether this situation right now is going to affect the number of internships that are out there, particularly the paid internships. And to this end, this question really mirrors a question that is being posed across the board, whether that's respect to postdocs or jobs. Institutions really, healthcare institutions in particular, are really struggling during this time of COVID. Most institutions across the country, their ambulatory services are closed, if not fully, to some significant extent. And this is causing a significant hemorrhage in money for the healthcare system that is having an impact on their ability to have new hires and really just keep afloat, if you will. So again, here's a situation where there's certainly no direct indication that this is going to cause a sort of a mass decline in internship positions around the country. I've not heard a single thing that's been said on that front, and I don't believe that to be true at all. I am not in a position to sort of guarantee that there's not a site out there that won't be able to continue to fund a particular internship program in this coming year. Again, that's really going to come down to the economics of that particular institution and their funding. But I don't expect to see, again, sort of this mass exodus of internship programs. David or Darren, I don't know if you have other comments on that.
I might just add something real quick. I think it's helpful for trainees to understand that funding for positions is often kind of done well in advance, a several-year process of planning and allocating funds. And I can't speak on behalf of all institutions, but I know at my institution, I've been hearing things from other institutions that they are working as much as possible to make sure that changes to those standing budgets are not affecting trainees. There might be staff effects, which are very stressful for all of the community. But anything that would change the larger picture of things is not something that we would know about right now, but it's also something that we would probably know far in advance. So it's just something to kind of keep your ears out for, but not to panic about right now.
Emily, make one good point there too, is that certainly I know this to be true within my institution, and then really in most institutions across the country, if not all, that there is a strong value on education, right, on training. This is if your institution, if a particular institution has an internship program, it's because there is value there in providing that training. It's certainly not something that an institution has to do. Oftentimes it actually is harder to provide that training. It might even come at an economic cost, but because there's value in bringing forth the next generation of psychologists and neuropsychologists, you still go forth with building that type of program. Because of that, either the same people that have put forth that program, and then some of the institutional structures like GME, there's nothing more important to them than protecting students and trainees, particularly when contracts are already in place. So in most cases, the priority really in this time is going to be to support those who are most vulnerable, which would be, again, trainees, including interns, right, and students, to make sure that they are, the funding that was provided to those positions, remains constant and true. All right, there were other questions that we had here that were really about the application, the internship application process. Specifically if there is going to be any changes to the nuts and bolts of that process given the current situation. My understanding right now is that is not the case. So anything that from a logistical standpoint that you've hopefully already been learning about and sort of informing yourself with respect to what you need to do to actually formally apply to a program still exist. This is for a lot of reasons. One, those systems are quite massive, they're intricate, and they took a lot of time and money and effort to kind of put in place. So even some minor changes are fairly difficult to make within that larger system. The other issue is that given the uncertainty and the changes that have come with this crisis, it's there's this balance that's going on between wanting to make sure that we are us as separate organizations are sort of being proactive in our approach and making adaptations where possible, but not changing things from a structural standpoint and with to such an extent that if it's not necessary, I suppose. We don't know if we're on a 2-week time frame or a 2-month time frame or a 2-year time frame with how this is really going to be affecting the healthcare system and the educational and training system at large. So there's a little bit of a wait and see approach too in terms of how some of our sort of standard processes are rolled out or really adapted because we don't know when and if that's actually going to be needed in the big picture. But for right now, the application process that you would normally embark upon is still the same process. I do want to switch gears just a little bit, though. We'll swing back in a second to kind of thinking about how this impacts applications and some changes that might occur when you are on internship. There are a lot of questions to that regard. But I want to take a moment to focus on something that I think is actually incredibly important, both now and in the future. And it really has to do with how you are utilizing your time as students and trainees right now. Most of us have really experienced a shift in our day-to-day. A lot of us are home. We're not in class the same way as we once were. We may not be in our practicums at all. We're certainly in the same capacities as we once were. So understandably, that brings up a lot of questions, not just about how we accumulate, hours, and again, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but essentially, what do we do with this time that we have on our hand, and how do we make ourselves a competitive applicant? So for those of you who've actually posed that question, I applaud you. I think that you're already ahead of the game if your mindset is one in which you are thinking about how you can be creative and use this time to improve your knowledge and competencies. If you're thinking that, you're already in the right place. But I do think there's some direction that we might be able to give you all from a more tangible standpoint. So maybe I'll turn this over to Darren if you have some thoughts just on how students can really utilize this time to become competitive as an intern and really thinking about their future careers as budding neuropsychologists.
Yeah, sure. So I have a couple thoughts regarding this topic. I sort of see graduate education as the development of three core areas. And so this is just coming, wax a little bit. So I see students, their main priority is developing knowledge, skills, and attitudes in broadly based clinical psychological training, but also specifically in neuropsychology. So when you think about those three areas, knowledge, skills, and attitudes, knowledge is the things you're going to get in class, right? From the papers you read, the books. It's just soaking up all that, critical, core, foundational, just things you have to know, the semantic knowledge, right? The skills are the practical experiences that you get through neuropsychological assessment, through therapy, through running data analytics, all those kinds of things. And then your attitudes, I consider more professionalism. So, how are you approaching certain experiences? How are you dealing with ethical quandaries, issues related to diversity? Just kind of a mature sense of becoming and growing into this identity as a clinical neuropsychologist. So if you capture it or you think about it from those three perspectives, I think there's certainly some things you can do during this time. And they may be each different depending on where you're training at, who your mentor is, and how far along you are in the program. For me, I think, along the knowledge sphere, right? These are things that you typically acquire in class. So you may be taking classes, may be doing these things online. I would recommend that you still stay abreast and stay current, stay close to the fire, if you will, of the content areas that you should be training for, but also that you are developing expertise in, whether that is your thesis, your dissertation, or, some other kind of key topic, depending on the lab that you're in. So say you're in a Parkinson's, lab, that's what you're keeping current with. So doing things like, subscribing the table of contents for journals, discussing things with colleagues, having impromptu journal clubs, if you will, if you have that kind of time on your hands, I think are good ways of doing that. From the skills perspective, I think it's a bit harder. I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges is how can you develop competently as a clinical neuropsychologist in these COVID times, if you will. There are efforts by some of our main clinical neuropsych societies that have attempted to address these questions. You can look to sites like AACN and SEN and others for various types of training regarded telepsychology, we'll call it broadly, type services. So I don't know about y'all's programs, but in our clinical psych program, we've asked students to take the free APA telepsychology courses that are available. That's just something we feel like, well, no better time than the present to do that, right? You've got probably some extra time in your hands, but in addition, we kind of got caught flat-footed in a number of ways with this pandemic. So it probably is good to at least have some awareness or familiarity with not only the science, but the practice of telepsychology and specifically teleneuropsychology. Some of you may be aware of the recent webinar that INS put on a couple of weeks ago on teleneuropsychology. There's free access to that, and so that's something I encourage. So when it comes to skills, again, not ideal, but I think there are some small things you can do to keep abreast and keep current and try and, expand your horizons when it comes to the practice of neuropsychology. And then finally, when it comes to this, attitudes of professionalism, I would say, I think we're all kind of maturing to some extent in this pandemic, right? There's just new things we're feeling and experiencing and learning. Part of this, I would say, is being able to establish a routine, establish a schedule. I wouldn't let life become all pajamas and, laying in the bed kind of thing, right? Even though I know that's kind of where we all want to be. I think establishing a schedule, keeping to that schedule, even if it's modified, to establish some kind of routine, right? What do we tell our patients? That the brain loves and craves routine and craves development of good, strong habits. It does better when it's involved in some type of, habitual practice, especially for those who are, struggling with certain types of, cognitive impairments. So I would say establish a routine, stay in contact with your mentor, establish regular supervision. Don't be afraid to talk to them about these issues. And one other important thing that I think it would be valuable is start broaching the subject of health and wellness with your mentors or other faculty or other people or colleagues. You know, it doesn't have to be a mentor, about how to create and establish best practices when it comes to your own personal wellness. This isn't something we do very well in neuropsychology or even in psychology in general. There's a fair amount of literature, and thankfully more of it is coming out, but I think we need to be better about systematically incorporating ideas and concepts about wellness with our trainees. We just need to start instilling that in people at a young age, if you will, at the training level, so that we can all talk about it, that we understand it. You know, there are some neuropsych specific papers. There's just a couple out there on this issue, but for me, I like talking to my grad students that are in my lab, and I ask them, we spend 5 minutes, okay, let's put school aside. What are you doing to take care of yourself? You know, I have students that they are in a bowling league together. I have one that likes to rock climb. I have one who likes dance classes. So, yeah, anyways, those are just some thoughts. I don't know if Scott or David has some ideas.
Yeah, thank you, Darren. I think those are fantastic ideas. David, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just a couple of quick things. So yeah, I like that emphasis, and I think that what we want to try to do in opportunities like this is really make the most of whatever it presents us with. And in this particular case, for some of us, this is presenting us with a lot more time. Or at least a different allocation of our time, which can sometimes be very unsettling and kind of unnerving, but can also be potentially kind of rewarding. What you were just saying actually made me think back to my days in grad school, and I remember one of my professors saying in a class at one point that you know, grad school is really the time in our training and in our professional life when we tend to have more time for absorbing and soaking in that knowledge. And I remember at the time thinking, I was a grad student and I felt overworked and I was really busy. And I remember at the time thinking, how is that possible? Surely this is wrong. Surely when I'm done with grad school, I'm going to have way more time because I won't be taking all these classes and I won't be doing 20 things at once. But the truth is he was mostly right. I think that our time gets so fractionated, and this is not just true for psychologists or for neuropsychologists, but this is true for most people. So that really did just resonate though, because I think when we think about all the different things to do, it can be hard to layer 1 or 2 or 3 more things on. But I think this is the time when we want to be trying to soak up as much information as we can. I've been impressed not only with the INS webinar on teleneuropsychology, there's been webinars and other resources made available through the IOPC, which we can talk a little bit more about. And we have some links to resources for the IOPC on the APA Division 40 website. And maybe Emily can share some of those links and maybe others with you guys as well. It's just a wealth of information out there. So it doesn't mean that we all have to go hit the books and read about everything there is to know about telepsychology or teleneuropsychology, but I think there is an opportunity to perhaps soak in as much knowledge as we can. I've heard of supervisors at the internship and postdoc level creating journal clubs sort of on the spot, or maybe seminars or sort of informal series where we're highlighting classic works in the field of neuropsychology. And obviously it's better and it's more impacting if we can do this in person and if we can do this more formally, the way we're used to with in-person classes and meetings. But I think a lot of this can be done virtually, a lot of this can be done on our own. And I think at every level of training, what's going to be most important to the next stage of training, whatever that is, whether that's internship, whether that's postdoc, whether it's getting your first job after postdoc. I think when we're interviewing and when we're trying to showcase our skill set and when we're trying to showcase our knowledge and our professionalism, we want to be able to say, this is what I did. This is what I did when I was stuck at home with the pandemic, or this is what I did with all that extra time. And I realize that's a misstatement. I realize it for a lot of us that we don't have extra time. It's just our time is different. But I think we want to be trying to think as creatively and as innovatively as we can, so that we can continue growing as a professional, as a scholar, as a clinician. And I think that fortunately we live in an age when that is possible, even though at the same time we all get a little burned out on Zoom from day to day.
I think I know that we've been on this topic for a little while and we're eager to move on to some additional topics, but there's a couple practical things that I just wanted to mention in relation to what Darren and David were saying. For all of you who are asking, you know, these questions of, well, okay, so what should I do? And you're getting these ideas from Darren and David. First is work with your mentor and create a training plan during this time. How are you going to document your time and how are you going to use your time? You don't have to feel like you have to use 80 hours a week, like still stay within the parameters of your program, put your health and well-being first, but also start developing a plan because you're going to be asked to do the same thing when you go on to internship and when you go on to postdoc. And even though our world is rapidly changing, part of your graduate education is also learning of how to adapt to our changing field. So this is a good chance to kind of prepare for that. And as you go on internship, you're going to be asked to do lots of different things and learn on the fly. And that was internship to begin with. Not necessarily even now, but now more than ever. So be prepared to do that. And I would suggest keeping a sheet of just generally kind of what you're doing. That way you can account for your hours and your time and where you're developing your competencies. One thing that's helpful for that is the EAC through SEN has a doctoral and training education worksheet. And so visiting this with your mentor is a good idea because you, especially in neuropsychology, you want to make sure that you're hitting on all of those kind of Houston guidelines topics, that you're focusing your competencies in all of those different areas. So that's a good place to kind of find the weaknesses and suss them out. You will get the time to see the patients and you will get the time. It's coming. I know it feels kind of like anxiety provoking because you want to be able to do everything right now. But it's okay. We're going to just shift your time a little bit and focus on those other things that you were going to have to do anyway as part of your training. Some things that sites are doing are they're shifting also the way that we're looking at what does clinical training and clinical hours look like. So that might be reviewing the data in a case that your supervisor has seen and then writing it up on your own, even though that person isn't in the clinic. So where the name of the game is flexible thinking. And so as you're kind of finding these creative approaches, feel free to speak up to your supervisors about your creative ideas for meeting your training needs and documenting that. We've had some questions in the chat about, you know, should I bring this up in my internship applications or how should I document this and help people be aware of that? Certainly on your CV is one place to document that. Your training directors are going to work with you on how to document hours, and APIC has come out with some statements about kind of guiding you on how to document your hours. We have that available in our Google Doc, links to that, and you can get it on the APIC website. So there's a lot of guidance coming in. We don't have, you know, perfect answers for everything, but the name of the game is flexible thinking, keeping track of things, keeping an eye on the bigger picture, because you know, all of those things are going to help you as you're moving along. Additionally, one last thing that I want to mention is in terms of didactics, you know, this is not an SEN initiative, but it's something that we are certainly in support of, is the new didactic series called No Neuropsychology. You've probably seen this come out on the listserv, and it just started this last week. It's a didactic series that's kind of focused towards trainees in particular, to provide didactic education in an online format to kind of supplement your education right now. We're offering didactics in 4 different areas, including clinical issues, research, professional issues, and assessment issues. These are 4 areas of competency that you're developing as a graduate student. So this is a really great opportunity to, you know, document that you attended didactics in these given areas to continue your education in those areas.
Thank you all. I think that was great information. Hopefully you guys can really take away from that. And I think bottom line, what we're saying is that there's a lot out there. Be proactive, be creative. Absolutely communicate with your training director and mentors. Absolutely. The question shouldn't be, should you do it? But it's, how often maybe, you don't want to be the pest, but go, you take control over your training. Hopefully you've got training directors that have already come up with a plan for you in your home institutions. But if not, show that drive and initiative and get creative about how you work towards competencies. And I just want to underscore that too, because I'm going to get to some questions here about hours. But I really want to stress the fact that now in your training and really across your training and education, more so than hours, what you should really be focusing on is the development of your competencies. Okay. As a training director, I can say, for myself, when I sit down with a student, when an applicant in my program, I am a lot less concerned with whether they've done, 73 hours of this, 95 hours of that. I actually, to be honest with you, have no idea what that means. And I know that in our world, we're sort of forced into this system where we have to keep track and count hours. So, I recognize that. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be thinking about competencies, particularly during this time, because what is going to be important to your success in your graduate training and as you move forward and getting that internship you want and that postdoc that you want is to say that, here is how I developed my knowledge base and my skills, what Darren was talking about earlier, right? So if you use that doctoral training and education worksheet, it's going to lay out there everything from top to bottom. It's going to talk about your clinical skills and your knowledge base and research and professional service. And it allows you really to have a good self-evaluation and really honest look at yourself and where your strengths and gaps are in training. Hopefully you do that with your mentor. And what better time to do that than now, and to say, okay, well, if I've got a gap in research, here's how I'm going to use my time right now to sort of strengthen that skill. All right. Keep in mind that although understandably we're all sort of stressing about the clinical hours and what that's looking like, this is impacting everybody across the country. Okay, so every single one of you in some way, shape, or form is getting impacted by this. And when you go for your internship interviews, every single internship training director is going to have, full consciousness and be absolutely well aware of what just happened and likely what's still going on, right? So you're not going to be in this position where you're competing against other folks in terms of like hours, right? Hopefully, I say that we're not really trying to think of this as a sort of a competition amongst, students, at all. But certainly when it comes to the hours game, that's not going to be the issue because this is something that has just hit everybody. So the bigger piece of the puzzle here is not, how many hours were you able to get doing X, Y, or Z, or whether you did how many face-to-face versus how many tele-neuropsychology batteries. It's going to be how you optimized your time and work within your training program to develop knowledge and skills. And if you can tell that story, I think you're going to be more than successful in attaining your internship and then moving forward. To that end, some of these questions that were really about specific hours, I really want to make the point that for those of you who haven't, I would actually go to the APIC site, look at, what's on there just in general, but also in terms of the COVID resources. They have some really excellent FAQ sections on there right now that I think could be highly valuable. And then really be, again, in good communication with your training director, whether it's at your home institution, at your grad school, or if you already have an internship forthcoming, and be talking with them about, what their expectations are and how they're viewing the situation right now. The really critical thing to point out here is that we can often, we think in terms of these thresholds that you need a certain amount of hours to, have to complete a practicum or an internship or a postdoc. And in most cases, that's actually not the case, okay? When we're thinking about our evaluations of students at the end of the year, whether it's practicum, whether it's internship, right? We are thinking about that again in terms of competencies. we sit there and we have to be in a position as training directors to say that this student has developed the fundamental core competencies that we feel comfortable allowing them to move forward to their next step of training or education, or if at the postdoc level, to independent practice as a neuropsychologist. So it's not hour-based. Really APIC has some requirements here about the percentage of activities and direct service hours that need to be, that a trainee needs to have. So really 25% of the training's activities have to be direct service. But I think, as Emily was alluding to, what direct service means is pretty broad. And that's really been loosened up as well. So certainly there are numerous ways to get sort of direct service hours, whether it's through telehealth in neuropsychology or otherwise, and really some other mechanisms that may have sort of traditionally been viewed as indirect hours that are being able to certainly potentially be able to consider it as direct service hours at this point in time. So I really think for most individuals, sort of meeting that threshold from an APIC requirement is not going to be really that much of a big deal, because that's percentage based as opposed to sort of a raw number that you're going to have to hit. Again, the bigger question for you is going to be when you write those cover letters and you have those applications for your internship, it's going to be how you talk about how you use your time and how you develop your competencies. So, particularly for those of you that are ready to go in an internship or, do that now, you're really all squarely in the same boat. And for those of you earlier in your doctoral training, you actually have a really nice opportunity to do that self-evaluation, and not just in light of COVID, but just in general, and to be thinking about how you can utilize your time well, because it's going to be, again, less of an hours game than anything else. It's true that there, from a licensing standpoint, which is a different ballgame, that again, most jurisdictions, so we're talking about state licensing laws and in Canada, territories, that there are some that require sort of a certain number of hours of kind of clinical practice at the internship, or really in the postdoc level for some states as well. But those are actually just not all that many as well. And really it gets at more of a competency-based requirements for most jurisdictions. But again, that's information that's also freely available. So you can talk to your training directors, and you can look at the state licensing boards if there's already sort of thoughts or concerns there, to see what their requirements are for obtaining a license. So there is information out there on this issue, but I think more than anything else, if I'm not hammering it home enough, I would do your best to sort of alleviate some concern about hour counting at this point in time, and really step back from that, take that pressure off, and think about more purely your development as a psychologist and as a neuropsychologist. Others have anything to add on that front in terms of how we think about hours for internship? Darren or Dallin, Emily, David, Emily?
Yeah, I just would echo what you said. I mean, really, and I know it's hard when you're a student, because you are focused on numbers, you're focused on thresholds, you're focused on indicators and benchmarks, right? We're kind of trained to do that. But you'll find, as you mentioned, as you start growing older and maturing into these roles, it's more about, again, your overall development, your level of confidence that you're attaining in graduate school. And again, internship and postdoc directors, they get that, they understand that. So they'll be looking for they'll have their eyes and ears out for these other indicators, because they're going to recognize that these numbers and other strict thresholds just aren't going to be useful for probably the next couple of years or so. So they'll be mindful, and they'll adapt and make decisions based on these other indicators that Scott mentioned.
And I'll just jump in and add that I think, Scott, you mentioned this, and Darren, you've mentioned this idea of really trying to personalize your training, especially at a time like now, with good detailed discussions with your mentors, right? So your doctoral advisors, your clinical supervisors. And I think, reflecting on, Scott kept saying this idea repeatedly, which is 100% true, which is really The goal is competency development. The goal is not racking up the most hours, even though it's not to say that hours are irrelevant. Hours can be part of that, but it certainly isn't the full story. And with the full story really being more focused on competency development, really be thinking about that and discussing with your mentors how to be increasing and improving and expanding your competency set. Because again, we can be doing that with increased knowledge. We can be doing that with, as Emily was saying, in some ways, maybe some more flexible ways of thinking about how do we expand our case conceptualization skill set? How do we expand our familiarity and our comfort with certain types of differential diagnosis? Sure, there's no substitute for real life clinical experience, but at the same time, we can work on those competency level skills even in a time like this. So I think that's really what we want to be striving for.
And I think that gets in some of these kind of the next set of questions that I have listed here too, which were really queries about, what might internship look like, next year, and what some of the changes, what might some of the changes be? I certainly don't have all the answers for that. Every site is not only, certainly different to begin with, and then different in how they are adapting to or handling this crisis. And that's not just from a training perspective, but just from a pure clinical perspective, right? So faculty and staff across the country are doing different things in this time. Some have stopped clinical services altogether. Some have moved towards models where they're providing clinical interviews and really more of like an acute assessment and triage over telemedicine for their patient populations, but not doing true neuropsych testing. And some have moved and are already doing full neuropsych testing, or were doing that before. So there are significant differences between, how clinics are operating, and then, obviously how their trainees would be operating within those particular clinics. We also certainly don't know what the situation is going to look like in the summer or fall when internships really, roll out, which was going to have clear bearing on what your training would look like, whether you're going to be providing in-person services at some level or not. And if you are or aren't, what those services might look like. So there's a lot of variability out there, but from a personal standpoint, I can tell you that I have a hard time believing that your training is going to look the same as it would a year ago, right? Because our jobs are not the same, and the situation across our country and really the world is not the same as, right? And I think that's okay, because you're going to be training to provide services to patients who are living in this world today and tomorrow. So your training should match the needs that are currently there. To that end, I think there's going to be a clear need to develop some skills and knowledge base in teleneuropsychology, and maybe even telepsychology, as a whole. A lot of us are being asked to provide other types of services from a psychological standpoint, use our skills as clinical psychologists to address the growing mental health crisis in this country due to COVID. So really being able to wear different hats at this time is also an asset. But I think it's reasonable to expect when you go to internship next year that teleneuropsychology could very well be a part of your training. Again, talk to your training directors and figure out with them what their thoughts are on that. But I think that's certainly reasonable. And then to that end, if you can build up some knowledge base through the multiple webinars that have already been talked about, and that I'm sure will be forthcoming, and other trainings that would help you be ready to be, not just, kind of a quote unquote trainee in this teleneuropsychology environment, but somebody who can be an active contributor to the team. I think you're going to position yourself where you can be a really big asset, and sort of a wanted commodity, if you will, in terms of your internship applications. Again, the landscape is going to be different. We're all going to be asked to be doing different things. I think that could be challenging, but fun. And I think if you can start preparing now, in terms of developing that knowledge base, you'll be well prepared, or as prepared as possible, to meet those challenges head on in your internship year.
And to that end, I add just a couple other things. People often ask me, what is like one of the top things that I can do to get ready for internship? One of the number one answers I give people is finish your dissertation. More and more training sites want you to have good progress on your dissertation, or if not being done with your dissertation. So if you're really not sure how to use your time, this is also a good time to check that off your list so that you can go to internship and feel like you can really focus on all the new things that are happening with your training. I also want to remind everyone that you guys are all in the same boat. So it might be kind of anxiety provoking to hear us say, here's all the new things that you can be learning. But we're all learning that all at the same time. And so don't feel like you have to be an expert at teleneuropsychology or telepsychology before internship. That's what they're there to do. That's the time for you to learn and develop this also. All of these years, in no means do you need to be perfect or competent at every single thing before internship. That's just simply not the point of how our education works. So keep that in mind. And, some people are wondering, will they take in account for my hours? I'm getting some kind of questions in chat. Also keep in mind that everyone is affected by this. Their access to live patients has changed. Their access to clinics, all of those things. So training directors understand that your guys' world has changed, and they will be reviewing all of the applications with that view. But also keep in mind that everyone else's applications will be just as affected as you are. So you're not going to be at a disadvantage in any way because of this is happening, because literally everybody is in the same disadvantage as you. Some people are also asking, are we going to get to, is there going to be a shift to video interviews for internship and stuff like that? Honestly, training directors are kind of swimming day by day right now. They're trying to keep afloat because things are so rapidly changing. So I doubt that any sites have kind of seriously made a decision about how they're doing interviews in December or January. So we'll just have to see over the next few months. But with that said, it's probably likely that a lot of sites are going to shift over to video interviews to kind of help relieve the burden and help with the public health kind of aspects of things. And so when they know, they'll let you know too. And so I know that it's hard to kind of sit tight, especially summer is time when you kind of start getting ready to apply for internship, but that information will come, and when they know, they'll let you know too.
Thank you, Emily. And I don't know if some of those questions about the hours were coming in before or after sort of our recent discussion, but in the case that they were coming in after, I'll try to be even clearer if I can. So for most places, there's not a minimum set number of hours required, right? People think about sort of a threshold and you're sort of forced to put something down. But whether you're getting in or not is really not based on the number of hours. And two, those hours and those expectations are going to be adapted given COVID, right? There's not a single training director I know out there who is not going to be highly, knowledgeable about what's going on. You can't not be. We're all living it, and who's not going to factor the, how this has changed in terms of practicum hours and otherwise. We all know what's going on, and everything is going to be taken into consideration when we're evaluating applicants, whether it's for interns this year or next year and beyond. So, that's absolutely going to be taken into consideration. I really, I know it's easier for me to say than maybe for you to sort of accept, but of all the things to have that anxiety or pressure on, I would say that's not one of them, right? We know where we're at. We know what's going on and how this is affecting all of you. And in every way, shape, and form, we're going to be taking in this crisis and how it's affecting your practicum training and your coursework and otherwise. That's going to be understood when it comes time for you to apply. We had a few other questions here about, let me see, kind of a different angle, but I do want to address these. We had some questions here about how COVID is affecting students and trainees. really faculty and their broader healthcare teams with light of issues of discrimination and what is being done to really help protect Asian Americans in this really with respect to discrimination, direct or indirect, during training. So I think that is certainly an important issue to address. I know there have been several statements that have come out from various neuropsychology and really just broader psychology training organizations around this issue. Certainly the expectation would be from all these organizations and from the the training community at large that each one of us maintain really the highest level of responsibility to protect each other and to certainly protect our students and trainees. We have that responsibility as leaders in this space and as training directors first and foremost. And that means that we are being proactive in having these conversations with our students and trainees, with our other healthcare team workers, and really in any form that is possible, and that we're keeping this what we know to be real, this level of over discrimination at the forefront of our thoughts as we're going about our work each day, and that we're not letting issues big or small slip by. This has to do with making sure that there's safe communication and an open channel for issues of discrimination to be brought forth from students and trainees to their training directors. And I think that is, that's highly important. Some of this mirrors what the expectations would be like even in a sort of a pre-COVID stage, that all of us in training roles have that responsibility to be, proactive and intentional about how we work with all of our students and how we keep issues of culture and diversity and inclusion at the forefront, and that we protect our students and trainees. There's obviously power differentials there, and then that means that the responsibility really falls onto us to protect students. So there isn't essentially one way or one thing that is being done by any particular individual or organization because this comes down to a person-to-person and situation standpoint. But the onus is out there and has been put out there by our various training organizations to keep this as a priority. And certainly, us on this call would echo how important that is. And to also open up the channels that if for some reason that you as students are not finding that is the case within your home institution, that you feel empowered to bring that forward to other mentors or supervisors that you have or other leaders within the neuropsychological organizations or APIC as well. The last stop does not necessarily have to be with your training director, although the hope would be that you'd have that good line of communication to bring those issues to him or her first. David or Darren, do you have other thoughts on this?
I think you said it well when you said we really do prioritize, standing up and sticking up for each other during this time. And I think there's been good national neuropsychological and psychological organizational efforts in that vein. In the field of neuropsychology, we've had several statements and even I think some webinar-based discussions on this topic. So I think if people are curious, start there and look into what's being done, and if there's still need that again is not being addressed, particularly as things move forward. I think we all want to hear that, right, at every level of organization and leadership. So keep us posted.
And I know, there's been multiple organizations that have done good work on this. I know the Asian American Neuropsychological Society has done really great work and put out a really strong statement on this issue, which multiple other sites and organizations have supported that I know that I personally support. So, I think we'd be foolish to say that this is, not an issue or pretend it's not an issue. We know that it is for our trainees, for our colleagues, for our patients, and I would encourage each one of you on this call, you don't have to be a training director to take responsibility and ownership over supporting your colleagues as well, and to making sure that either overt acts of discrimination or aggression or minor slights go unaddressed. So I think it's as really the hope would have been, period, that it takes all of us to really be proactive on this front.
Perhaps in our last few minutes, we can address some additional issues surrounding research. I know that many students, your research has been halted, you're unable to see participants, and there's a lot of concern, which is understandable because although graduate school is a long process, it's a very carefully timed process that I know each of you are trying to meet certain benchmarks and milestones within certain given time so that you can proceed to the next step in achieving your research goals, and expectations are one of them. So with this in mind, I think it's very important for you guys to continue to talk with your supervisors and make plans and backup plans and triple backup plans for how to proceed in a timely manner. It's okay to let go of your dream research project for the sake of sticking to a timeline and getting something done so that you can progress and not get stuck. And with that said, I encourage you guys, if your data collection is really derailed by all of this, to talk with your supervisors about using pre-collected data sets or finding alternative solutions to this. And to that end, ANST is working on an initiative. As you can imagine, my email has been swamped this week, but I'm sending out within the next day emails to the broader neuropsychology community to call for resources to support you guys. So our aim is to amass a list of open source data sets that are easily accessible by user agreements, and lists of faculty who have pre-collected data who are open to talking to students who might need access to data in a given area and that they can kind of get involved with their research. So we will be collecting this information in the next coming weeks, and we'll be then connecting with you guys through the ANST listserv and other channels to give you guys an opportunity to reach out and ask for help so that we can get you access to those resources. So be on the lookout for that, and in the meantime, take the initiative, talk with your supervisors, raise your concerns with them, and think about what the plan and the backup plan and what the triple backup plan can be. And that's okay. Know that that's okay, and no one will ever fault you for, and really a good researcher is adaptable, and they can find ways to make, answer questions that are important, but also just get things done. Sometimes at the end of the day, it's just about getting it done.
Yeah, just a couple of words. I would say I completely agree with Emily. I just want to reinforce what she said. One thing, for those of you that want to establish a career in research, I mean, this is kind of a forced situation where you're experiencing what most researchers experience the whole time they do it, which is upset, disappointment, changes in course correction, and so on. So this is something that you get used to. One of my mentors told me, don't let perfect become the enemy of good. So, as critical and as important dissertations are, I agree with Emily that, in this situation, people will be understandable. Don't be afraid of modifications. Certainly, I'm familiar with many that have had to be modified in this current situation. And so that's just how things work. And it can surprisingly force you to think in very new and different and adaptive ways, and that can be valuable.
Okay. All right, so I am recognizing that it's 6:01 now, and I do want to respect everybody's time. I wanted to first thank both David and Darren and Emily for joining us and really hosting this call, joining as panelists here. I really encourage all of you attending to take into close advisement the information that they have shared today. I think you've got some really, really knowledgeable people who have a lot of good experience and direct insights about how this whole training education thing works. And I think if you can take a few nuggets of knowledge away from their words today, you will be better off for it. I wanted to extend my personal appreciation for all of you joining today. I know how stressful things are right now, and even if matters that are directly related to your own training and success, that it can still be difficult to kind of square off that hour a day to do something like this. So to your credit, you've been able to figure that out, and I think that alone really shows how invested you are in your professional growth. And if you're here, there's something to it and something about it, and I think you're already likely to be the kind of students who are going to be successful moving forward. So I commend you for that. Lastly, I just want to stress something that has been brought up a few times earlier on the call today. Hopefully we've been presenting information to you, relevant information about internship hours and the application process and what to do with your time. But I want to underscore how important the wellness piece in this is as well. And really, I don't want you all to walk away only holding on to this notion about the trainings and didactics that are out there and building competencies and think that our comments about your own personal well-being during this time are sort of, the obligatory comments that we must make. Quite far from that. We all very genuinely believe in what we've said on that front. And I think it's actually paramount not only to not only about your own well-being now, but really to your future success, both, personally and professionally. And really a big part of being able to develop and mature as a professional is being able to balance that professional and, those personal aspects. And I think most of us can tell you there's no actual balance. We're sort of swaying from one way to the other at any given moment. But I think half the battle, at least, is sort of keeping in mind that there is a give and take there, and being conscious and aware of when you need to put energy into one area or pull back in a particular area. You're going to be no good to yourselves or to your people if you are developing your competencies at 200 miles an hour and are burned out before you even get to internship. So we mean in a very real way when we say to take care of yourselves during this time, to utilize and look into all the wellness resources that are actually out there. And then if you're finding difficulties kind of taking care of yourself, to reach out to your peers, reach out to your mentors or supervisors, reach out to us, and ask for help in making that a possibility, because it's going to be important for you to learn how to do that, not just now, but throughout your training and really throughout your career. So please take that seriously, and maybe go home today and put your feet up and do nothing other than Netflix for the rest of the night. None of this happens overnight, and you will get where you need to go on a professional on the professional road in due time. So steady the course, but don't overdo it. So on that note, again, thank you for joining us today. Emily sent out a lot of good information, and we're not hard to find if you have future follow-up questions, so please feel free to reach out. Thanks, and if you're East Coast, have a good evening.